Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie Panfil, and I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Intelligent Democracy, the first hybrid PAC run by college students. Tonight is the next Q&A in our series with our endorsed candidates, and tonight we are very lucky to be joined by Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin from Michigan's 8th District. Before the Congresswoman talks about what she's been working on in Congress, I'm just going to read everyone a little quick intro. Also, we're having a little bit of connection issues, so there might be a delay in the playback. Everything is okay. Just with the Wi-Fi world that we're living in, that's what we have to deal with. Congresswoman Slotkin has spent her career in national service. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which took place during her first week of graduate school in New York City, the Congresswoman knew that national service would define her career. She was recruited by the CIA to be a Middle East analyst and went on to devote her career to protecting the United States from national security threats. In her role at the CIA, Representative Slotkin worked alongside the U.S. military during 3 tours in Iraq as a militia expert. In between her tours in Iraq, Congresswoman Slotkin held various defense and intelligence positions under both President Bush and President Obama, including roles at the White House and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. In 2011, Congresswoman Slotkin took a senior position at the Pentagon, and until January 2017, she served as Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. In this role, the Congresswoman oversaw policy on Russia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at the Pentagon, and participated in negotiations on some of the country's most pressing national security issues. A third-generation Michigander, Congresswoman Slotkin spent her early life on her family farm in Holly, Michigan. The generations of Slotkins before her worked in the family business, High Grade Foods, which was headquartered in Detroit and produced iconic foods loved by Michiganders, like the Ballpark Frank, first sold at Detroit Tiger Stadium. The values that made the family business successful were instilled in the Congresswoman, including an enduring commitment to integrity, decency, and hard work that guided her to a career of service. In the same mission focus, that Representative Slotkin brings to issues affecting citizens of Michigan's 8th Congressional District. For the Congresswoman, this means ensuring that everyone has access to affordable health care, lowering the price of prescription drugs, protecting access to clean water in Michigan's Great Lakes, and returning decency and integrity to politics, which has never been more important. Congresswoman Slotkin's background in national security contributes to the urgency and passion she brings to increasing government integrity and accountability and passing campaign finance reform. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, everyone, from folks who are watching from somewhere near campus, someone who is watching at home. I'm coming to you from my farm in Holly, Michigan, and where it's been pouring and raining all day. I just thought this was such an awesome group and so interested in what you guys are doing. Anything that kind of breaks the traditional mold for how we think about campaigning, how we fund campaigns. As someone who was a first-time candidate in 2018, I'd never thought about running. It was never on my bucket list. When you first start to run and you're talking to everyone and you're like, okay, how do I do this? You know, I'm having coffees with people and they're telling you their experience from when they were on a campaign or when they ran. And it was immediately apparent that we needed new models and new ways of approaching campaigning. I was like, how is that how we still do it? And one of the really freeing things about being a new member or a new candidate back in 2018 is I just could do it different ways. So I represent Michigan's 8th District, which is like middle of the state, between the suburbs of Detroit, the upper northern suburbs of Detroit, all the way over to Michigan and Michigan State University. And it's about an hour and 40 minutes across. It's a gerrymandered Republican district, and we ran in 2018 against a Republican incumbent, and it had been Republican for the previous 20 years. And we did it with a lot of help on our field campaign. The theory of the race, which we were able to execute. I'm a data nerd, so like I needed to understand numbers and like how we were going to get those numbers. I wasn't going to do something that was literally impossible. But we knew we needed really fantastic turnout among traditional Democrats, and we needed to convince, over 15,000 swing voters to swing, right? And we went about designing a campaign that did that, and we ended up having the largest field campaign in the Midwest. And I know we had a lot of U of M students and Michigan State students and everyone in between who were helping us as part of this campaign. But we ended up knocking 200,000 doors, sending 300,000 texts, and making 1 million phone calls, which is really a very large volunteer operation. And we know that it worked from data. I can look at the places where we knocked and called and engaged. And I did about 9 to 15% better in those areas than your average Democrat. And in the areas that we couldn't get to, we didn't have enough people power, we didn't go to those areas, I did about 3 to 5% better. So 9 to 15% better in tough areas is how you get your margin, right? It's how you take out those votes from some of those more conservative areas. We ended up winning by 13,000 votes, which was considered a landslide. I was prepared for a, contested election or winning by very, very little. We were up very late that night, but we won. And then I was able to be a part of this amazing freshman class of Congress. And you've heard all of the, firsts and new things about the class. We're 64 Democratic freshmen, but a total of 101 freshmen in Congress right now, out of 435 members. And think of any club or team you've ever been a part of. If a quarter of your people are new, it just creates a different feel in the place. And that definitely is different. It definitely feels different to be a part of this freshman class on the Democratic side. We have some of the youngest members that have ever been elected. We have the largest number of women ever elected in one class. We have the largest number of veterans and former intelligence officers voted in, I think, since World War II. We have the first 2 Muslim American women, the first 2 Native American women, but the ones you don't hear about that also, I think, have a really dramatic impact on the body is like first single mom with school-age kids, first mom who's lost her child to gun violence, first gay parents in Congress. We have the guy who invented Talenti ice cream and Belvedere vodka in our class. Like, it's an interesting group of people. And the most important thing that most of us have in common, if you line up the 64 freshmen and you say, like, raise your hand if you thought about running before 2016, I'd guess like 10 out of 64 would say they had thought about running. The vast majority of us were happily succeeding in our careers, doing other things, and just felt like the tone and tenor of politics in 2016 just felt different and unbecoming of the country. That was certainly the case for me. I'm a national security person, as Charlie said, but I just didn't understand that Michigan, the place where I grew up and that we love so much, voted for Donald Trump. That was hard to understand. And frankly, I was never political before. As a CIA officer and then a Pentagon, you are really apolitical. I mean, in fact, you're governed by something called the Hatch Act in the government, where like you can't display any political affiliation. I worked with people for 15 years, and I have no idea still what their political persuasion is. And in national security, that's the right thing, right? I happen to be married to a career Army. My husband, Dave, and I met in Baghdad on my 3rd tour in Iraq. It was a Saddam's palace romance. That's at least where we got to know each other, going to the chow hall and both of us being service people. And I have 2 stepdaughters, both in service. One's a brand new Army officer and the other one's a brand new physician for the VA. So that was what our family business was. But I came home, was looking, frankly, for a job in Michigan in the private sector, and started getting more involved in politics. And I would say if there's one sort of key lesson that I have learned from the last few years is just like, if not now, then when? And if not me, then who? Is a big mantra I encourage you all to really absorb. There isn't like a white knight coming to save us for whatever problem or thing that you're passionate about. Like, there just isn't this great organized plan that's going to be brought in to save the day. It really requires us to participate. And if there's a silver lining to the last few years, it's that just seeing people understand that their role in the system is to agitate and participate. And so that's been great and really powerful. I will tell you that the issues that I work on the most are the ones that I hear about literally when I'm grocery shopping. People will pull me aside and clutch my arm and tell me that they can't afford their insulin, or that they're paying more in their insulin costs than in their mortgage payment, that they couldn't afford their child's inhalers, so they couldn't send last summer, or that they don't know if they can drink their water. You know, they can't fish from the lake that they live on because of PFAS, this forever chemical. They don't know what's in the foam that's sweeping up on their beaches. They've bought property and they have no idea if they'll ever be able to sell it. I mean, we have 4 PFAS contamination sites in my district. And I'm a big believer on the environment. You know, I'm a national security person, no environmental background. But it is so clear to me that in Michigan and in other places in the Midwest, environmental security is homeland security. Like, if you can't hand your child a glass of water without knowing if he's going to get a lifelong learning disability, that's a threat to your family. And if you can't, like rivers that you learn to fish in, that's a threat to your way of life. And I think one of the big takeaways I've had in my first term in Congress is, like, the environment in Michigan is one of the most bipartisan issues we have, and we need new allies in this movement. And we need to expand the universe of people who care, because they do care. They just don't know that they're environmentalists. They really do care. And so I just think we need to get more muscular and serious about how we talk about protecting the environment. It's not some niche issue that only one political party believes in and thinks about. It's literally about the security and safety of our families. And if we frame it as a national security issue, we actually bring in a lot more allies in that, like, broad base. Last thing I will say is that, I had to take a number of pretty difficult votes in my first term in Congress. My district was definitely, for instance, not supportive of impeachment. I think upon reflection, I had to take a series of votes that caused a lot of people in my universe to say, like, do you think you're going to lose your seat over this vote? Is this the end of your very short congressional career? You voted for something that most of the people in your district don't support. And when you're asked every single day, often on camera, whether you're going to, do you think you're going to lose your job? Are you done? Are you finished? You actually get really comfortable saying, like, I might be, like, I don't know. But there just has to be more to this job than just doing anything to keep it, right? There just has to be a different way of governing that says, like, if that integrity still matters and that people still care about their elected leaders having integrity. And if that's not the case, it's not the right place for me, right? So in the end of the day, I was really glad that I had to take one of those potentially career-ending votes in my term, because it made me very certain that I was going to vote for the right reasons, and I was going to do my homework, do my research, listen to people, be open and transparent, but not cross lines that I thought would really sour my integrity. So now we're going into the election in less than 2 months. You've heard all of the, stuff that would normally sound like hyperbole, but it's not hyperbole. Like, it's the most important election of our lifetimes. I am thinking about a whole bunch of things, but obviously on my race, I am running against a guy who is a self-funder. His family is worth a lot of money. I think that's always going to be tough in a district like mine. But what you add to it, the COVID complications, which is that Michigan State University is not coming back to campus. That's 50,000 students that would otherwise be in my district and hopefully voting robustly in my district. So I'm completely supportive of the decision by the president of MSU on a public health basis. That's the right decision. But as a candidate, it certainly got my attention. And what I am frankly concerned about is how to find these young people who may be living right off campus, who might be living at a sorority or fraternity house, who may be staying home with their mom instead of going off to Ohio State, and they're in the area. Finding those folks and making sure they're registered is pretty high in my priority list. And so we've kind of revamped and reimagined our campaign for a different era, for a different world. And your help and your support would be hugely helpful. U of M and Michigan State students were really pivotal to us winning last cycle. My district is just 15, 20 minutes from Ann Arbor. It starts at Pinckney, Michigan. So it's a quick, easy thing to do. We'd love your help. And either way, I just love what you guys are doing and really appreciate you guys doing something different, because we need campaigning to get a kick in the butt.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words. And before we get started on the questions, I have a couple points in touch on that. The University of Michigan College Democrats is now part of our phone banking program. Last Wednesday, they made 600 calls to 18 through 30-year-olds in the district. And so organizations like ours are all banding together to make sure that there is a second Elissa Slotkin term. So moving on to the questions, with COVID-19 on everyone's minds, and a true lack of leadership from the White House on this issue, do you think that wearing a mask has become a political statement? And what are the dangers of politicizing public health as we move forward in the pandemic?
You know, it's amazing. Not only do I think that wearing a mask has become politicized and become a political issue, I know it. I've actually gone to or been, on a Zoom call with like a men's club that was interviewing me to see, would they endorse me in this election? And they asked me, they lean conservative. And I'm not sure they were going to ever endorse me, but I was willing to talk with them and be transparent and be available. And they said, the question was phrased, what is your political stance on masks? And I said, I don't have a political stance on masks. I have a public health stance on masks. They work. And unfortunately, the 8th district here in mid-Michigan has really seen a lot of tension build just on the ground, like in our restaurants. I mean, I do giant Zoom calls with our restaurant owners. They're just trying to stay afloat. They shouldn't be turning down any business, but they tell me that they have servers in tears once a week from some really nasty encounter with someone who refuses to wear a mask. I'm hearing it from everyone in retail. And then, the horrible thing is that it puts people who are making, often minimum wage as somehow the folks who are supposed to be, enforcing this, which is unfair to everybody as well. So I don't have a political stance. I have a public health stance. Please wear a mask, especially the students who are unlikely to get sick, but are more likely to pass it around to people who could get sick.
Exactly. I think that it's just crazy. I live right over the border in Toledo, Ohio, and we've had the same issue where there was quite a bit of uproar over Governor DeWine's mask order. This past weekend was the first time that I went to the grocery store and actually saw everyone wear a mask, even though it's September, which is just crazy to think about. We're 6 months into the pandemic. So switching topics and kind of going to your national security roots, with your sponsorship of legislation in the House Armed Services Committee, including the National Security Innovation Act from June, what do you believe is the greatest threat to national security, and how do you plan on addressing this issue through diplomacy?
So it's interesting, I never thought I'd say this in my life, but I think right now the greatest threat to Americans' national security is our domestic division. And man, that just wasn't where my head was at 5-7 years ago. I think we're only as strong abroad as we are back home. Our mandate abroad to lead in the world the way we can, through our principles, is only as strong as the mandate that comes from our citizens. And right now, people are focused on, yes, the economy, but just the sort of, frankly, cultural divisions that often keep us apart. So I think that that's a real threat, because if we can't agree on kind of where to invest our money or how to engage in the world, whether we should build up NATO and strengthen NATO or pull out from NATO, whether we should, end wars in the Middle East or keep them going. I mean, if we can't agree on basic things, then we are going to be weaker abroad. And then on top of that, there's a combination of losing our competitive advantage to countries like China that I am concerned about. We were the unambiguous dominating military power of the last 30 years. But China is gaining on us very quickly, and we're just not as agile and not making the strategic investments in things like artificial intelligence and the cyber world, just basic things like 5G, what network we'll be sitting on. I mean, those are really big deals. That I'm worried about. And then, when I was at the Pentagon, I was an acting assistant secretary of defense, and my team helped co-write the first study of how climate change should be dealt with by the military. And what was abundantly clear was that, again, climate change is a national security issue. And we looked at competition in the Arctic, and we looked at food insecurity around the world and conflicts that could erupt. We looked at an increase in the number and ferocity of superstorms and how many National Guardsmen get called out, every single year to help with natural disasters, and how that would change our planning. So I think that there is a number of compounding issues, but nothing is more important to our national security than feeling like we are united, being united as a country.
No, I definitely agree. And I think for a lot of young people, this domestic division we're seeing is almost confusing in the sense that, a lot of, with white supremacy being declared the, most prominent national security threat by the Department of Homeland Security, as I like to call them, those are against like kindergarten values, and essentially like the things that we all learn in school and how to treat each other is the same thing that we don't see like in the real world, as we want to call it, and how people are treating each other. And on a similar note related to young people, Gen Z and younger millennial Americans have been leading the fight for climate change and climate justice in the crisis that we were born into. So how do you plan on supporting their message and actions through, we have a lot of racial justice issues going on and protests going on, but also climate justice as well in America?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty clear that we can't, continue to deal with the issue of our climate, with the environment writ large, with what I call like ankle biting bills. They're good. They are good. But a lot of what we work on and what we pass are sort of like, we can take and do something good on this small slice and on this small slice and on this small slice. And it misses kind of that we need something pretty significant in order to mitigate the effects of climate change. You can't kind of ankle bite your way to a situation where you've really lessened the risk. And so, but I'm a pragmatist, right? Like I'm about getting points on the board in legislation that passes into law and changes things on the ground. And so I'm a big believer that we need something like the Green Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the greatest minds of a generation getting together in a room with a mandate, with a budget, to figure out like the generation's biggest problem, at that time, and sort of conundrum. And I think we need the same thing as it relates to the effects of climate change. In the Pentagon, we're taught to do contingency planning. We know that even for things that have a low probability of happening, right, the Pentagon's out there planning. And so for climate change, it just, to me, should be, we should be like deep in it on contingency planning. And we're not, right? We're sort of like, let's, little things, good things, right? Like I'm all for like, paper straws. It is good. Like it's not bad, but that's not going to bring it home, in terms of mitigating climate change. So I think we need something that's more comprehensive, and we need to have the greatest minds on this problem. That doesn't mean everyone agrees, right? It's a little hard to have a denier in that group, but it means that you purposely bring in people from different industries, from different scientific fields, and you have them hash it out on the ways that we actually change the situation. So that's where I am, is that we can't do what we need to do unless we bring people into the process and buy them in. And by the way, you also have to explain the economic piece to people. And there is a real economic piece. And I think that's an advantage. Like Michigan would love more wind business. Like we're happy to be investing in some of those alternative energies, but it's got to be part of like a bigger and bolder vision.
Exactly. And I think too, that also is for a lot of young people, right now it's very hard for anyone to find a job, but even more so for young people. And the idea that there's a whole sector of green jobs that we could create by really very little investment and just kind of a mood change in America, I think is something that should be a no-brainer, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever you want to call yourself. My next question relates to another issue that you've talked a lot about, and that's affordable healthcare. As we see more and more people struggle with affording healthcare, especially during this pandemic, what kinds of reforms do we need to ensure that everyone in our country has equitable access to quality, affordable healthcare?
Yeah, well, it's true. While I was a national security person, what actually really got me to run, like at the end of the day, when I started to really understand what kind of a daunting task it was the issue of healthcare, and in particular, my mom. My mom died in 2011 from ovarian cancer in suburban Detroit. And when she was diagnosed, she did not have health insurance. She had let it lapse. And she had struggled with healthcare her entire life. She had breast cancer when she was 31. So when I was a really little girl, she had breast cancer. And so for the rest of her life, she lived another 30 years, but she had a pre-existing condition. So when my parents got divorced, she was now working in the workforce, and when she lost her job in 2002, she lost her insurance. And because of that pre-existing condition, before the ACA, an insurance company could charge you whatever they wanted. If you had a pre-existing condition, they could just gouge you. There was no law against that. And so she could not afford the insurance that was on offer to her. She went 5.5 years with no insurance. So no checkup, no one saying like, you had breast cancer at 31, you should probably get a regular checkup every 6 months, a hysterectomy, genetic testing. In 2008, my brother and I helped her get insurance, and it was $1,000 a month and a $10,000 deductible. So her highest bill. And in the summer of 2009, without us knowing, she let it lapse. And in September of 2009, a couple of months later, she walked into an ER in suburban Detroit and was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. So I hope that many of you watching have never had the experience of having a loved one go to terminal diagnosis. Your life just explodes. There is no social life. There is no academic life. There is no job hunting. There is no nothing. It's just about getting that person you love the care that they need so they can live more than 3 months. And that same week and that same month that our lives were exploding was the same week and the same month that we were filling out paperwork for her to declare bankruptcy. So when I saw the House of Representatives voting to repeal the ACA, and those protections for people with pre-existing conditions, May of 2019. It was carried live on CNN. It was like, there was a Rose Garden ceremony. This was the bill that would have passed the Senate if John McCain didn't walk across the Senate floor and vote against his party, And they were having a big party on the White House lawn, and I could see the man who I would go on to run against. He was like in the 3rd or 4th row, and he was smiling and beaming and proud that he had voted to repeal the ACA and protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And his smile broke me. And I turned to my husband and I said, no, you don't get to ignore your constituents, vote against their interests, and keep your job. In the military, we have a term for this. It's called dereliction of duty. It is a fireable offense. We decided that day we were going to fire him, and in November of 2018, we fired him. So I am a big believer that all people deserve access to health care they can afford, period. Now, there's a lot of debate on how we do that, but that as a basic right, as a basic value, 100%. And for me, again, I'm a pragmatist. The ACA was not perfect. There's a lot of problems with it, but man, like you can't be gouged now. Like that is different, right? That is what we call progress. It may not be fast enough for everybody, but that is something. You can stay on your parents' insurance until 26, right? You can have lifetime caps so that there's a certain amount that you just, after which you don't have to spend. Those are important things. The thing that I would add to it is a public option. I am a public option person. I just think that there should always be an option there if that's the insurance that you want, that's competitive with the very expensive private insurance. And frankly, I think it's young people more than anyone who would sign up for that insurance. I know when I got my first job, They offered me Blue Cross, and I'm like, I don't need this. Why am I paying for this? I was healthy, and I think it's going to be, if done right, the most popular program in the country. And all the young people and healthy people who join are the ones who are going to keep it cheap and competitive. And I cannot tell you how many employers I know who would jump for joy if they didn't have to provide health insurance, because it's so expensive to provide through the workplace. So that to me is a huge step that we need to take. And then, come on, we got to be able to negotiate for drug prices. It's just Costco, like Costco. You buy a lot, you get a lower price. It's not brain surgery. And we can't negotiate for drug prices. In Medicare, in any fashion other than the military, which I get military insurance through my husband, and we're allowed to negotiate for drug prices. So I pay less for the same drug than my dad who's on Medicare. That's what we call in the business bunkers. So in any case, those are the things that I think are doable, are reasonable, are economical, and would mean that no matter what, you always had the public option there for you.
Great. So before I turn it over to Helena, who's going to finish off some of our questions, a question obviously on the mind of young people is, with large gaps in inequity and access to higher education, how will you work to ensure that all students from kindergarten through college will have access to affordable and quality education in America?
Yeah. Well, that's a interesting debate right now. And certainly in the state of Michigan, there's lots of people who I don't think actually, like Secretary DeVos, I don't believe she believes in public education. I think she believes in publicly funded options for education. And Michigan, when I was growing up here, was top 10 best public school systems in the country in our state, and now we're in the bottom 10. So it's a huge issue, obviously, in our state. I think on public education, the formula by which we fund our schools in the state of Michigan is deeply problematic because it reinforces the inequalities that already exist, the differences between people that already exist. So that would, to me, is a huge thing for K through 12. And I think we were on our way to really dismantling some of that and rethinking how we fund our schools. We have to invest in them. We've cut more and more out of education. We've preferenced, tests and testing, and we see the results for our students. We also cut out all the other options that we promote in, for instance, high school on what to do after you graduate. In Michigan, like skilled trades, they are good jobs for a lifetime. We have an expertise in them. In Michigan, we build things and make things. That is our legacy. And so why we don't talk about that in our high schools and middle schools anymore is also crazy. And then, frankly, for universities, first of all, I just believe there should never be a student loan that comes in at an interest rate higher than 2.5%. Being able to charge 10%, 11% on a student loan, like getting a loan for school is not the same as getting a loan to build a deck on your house. They're for very different purposes, and they shouldn't be treated as the same thing. And right now they are. So capping what you can be charged, interest rates that you can be charged. But then also, like, I have seen really amazing programs, particularly for first generation college students, where our local job market invests in these programs that students are going through. And if they help pay for your education. And if you graduate well with good grades, you have a job right out of college, right? They train you, you do a little extra training, and you go right into your first job. I think professions like nursing and education, that would be a huge boon because we don't have enough people going into those jobs right now. But also the high demand fields. Like if they're high demand, then you should help grease your pipeline. You should help people pay for school, and then they owe you service, right? Then you come and work there for a couple of years. And I think of so many of our students just want to know there's something at the end of the rainbow. Like, I'm going to study, I'm going to take on debt, I'm going to put myself out there. Is it going to work? Well, if you knew that you had a job or a number of job options, after, at the end of the rainbow, I think for some students, it would make it more reasonable, and it would certainly help pay down some of that debt before you even accumulate it when industry is helping to pay for your education.
No, as a college student, I definitely agree with you. All right, I'm now going to turn it over to our Deputy Political Director, Helena. Helena, you're on mute. Oh, Helena, we still can't hear you. Are you okay? Or okay, all right. Helena, we'll come back to you, Helena. It's okay. All right. So our next question was going to be, let me find it here. Was immigrants are an integral part of this country and deserve the same protections and rights that all Americans deserve. What will you do to make sure that our most vulnerable populations are protected from harmful legislation and policing that we've seen from the Trump administration?
Yeah. Well, it's safe to say that it doesn't take a congresswoman to tell you that our immigration system is broken. Broken, busted, not working. It doesn't work for anyone. There's not anyone who the system works for. And what I think hard for me, maybe because I sort of grew up around the military and working at the Pentagon, is somehow people have created this false choice that you can either govern with American values of treating people decently and a welcoming country to anyone and everyone who wants to pull themselves up and succeed, and being a place where if you are running from death and persecution, you always have the option to seek asylum here and seek shelter here. Those are our values. And they've set up a false choice between our values and security, that somehow you can't do both. You have to pick one. And I think that's completely crap. And anyone who has worked in the military will tell you that you have to be trained in both. The job is to provide security, and the job is to live by our values, our American values. And I think the same goes in policing. That's a false choice between treating people decently and protecting communities. I think on the immigration system writ large, we need a comprehensive plan that recognizes the role that immigrants play in our lives, in our economy, in our schools. I mean, the United States, if we lose our competitive advantage to other countries in attracting the best and brightest foreign students, we're done. I'm just telling you, we're not as strong on STEM as many other countries in the world. And if we are no longer the place that people want to come and start their business and do their education and start their lives, our competitive advantage in the world just shrinks. And so when we make it hard and we make it unwelcoming, it's literally counter to our strategic interests. I mean, at the most basic level. And then our economy. I mean, we need everything from a strong, willing workforce to the next great entrepreneurial idea to be coming from our immigrants. That's the role that immigrants have always played. And I can hear my tech folks in Rochester complaining that they can't get H-1B visas. I can hear my farmers complaining that they can't get legal immigrants to come and work in their farms. It's just it's a comprehensive problem. And unless we look at the problem holistically, we're going to continue to perpetuate a broken system. And that goes for immigration, but also goes for criminal justice reform, right? If we don't understand the role that we all have to play in providing security in our communities and what that means in a very different and new way, we're just going to keep repeating things that don't work in some communities.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, especially that immigration and immigrants in our country is, again, one of those issues that kind of connects to a lot of different things, like you said. And then our last question before we move to the audience questions, and people can submit their questions by commenting on whatever platform they're watching. What has representing your district in Congress meant to you personally, and why is it so important that we win Michigan's 8th again?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's just been the best honor, the greatest honor of my life. I mean, and I've done a lot of things that I'm really proud of in the national security world. But when you become an elected leader, unlike an appointed leader, When you become an elected leader, people expect you to fight for them. And you can't fight for them if you don't know their pain, if you don't know what keeps them up at night. And so people want to tell me their pain. I go to the grocery store, like I said, people are telling me their pain, clutching my arms. And that is a huge responsibility because people want very basic things. They want a better life for their kids. They want a better life for their community. So it's been a huge, huge honor. We've gotten to do, my husband and I, because it is really as a team sport when you have one spouse run for office. We have gotten to meet people we would have never met. But the prospect of passing laws and convening people in a way that changes their lives, that is a huge responsibility and a huge honor. And it's been like everything to us.
All right. Well, as someone who used to live in Michigan, thank you so much for all that you've been doing. And I'm now going to turn it over to Harita. But before I do that, in the comments section, there are a list of links and how you can help out the Congresswoman. You can visit her website to learn more about her. You can visit her Mobilize page to figure out how you can possibly fit volunteering into your schedule this fall. And there's also an ActBlue link. As we've talked about, campaigns are funded by the people, and we need to make sure that that happens as well. And I'm now going to turn it over to Communications Director Harita Iswara for the rest of our program.
Hi. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if my audio is working. Okay, perfect. So our first question is from Anna, who's one of our interns. She asks, with the recent Atlantic article about President Trump's remarks towards fallen veterans, such as, quote, losers and suckers, how would you work to support and protect veterans?
Well, this one's pretty personal. And when the story came out, I saw it like flash on my screen alert. And the first thing I thought was, I really hope my husband and my stepdaughter don't see this. And my husband has a flip phone, so it wasn't that hard. But my stepdaughter, who's 26, she's serving in active duty. Like, the commander in chief said, what now? So my first reaction was real, just kind of like a kick in the gut. Listen, the president has really made it his thing to attack his own intelligence community, his Department of Justice, the FBI, civil servants, people working at places like Commerce and Treasury. I mean, really everybody. And now even it seems maybe the uniform military. I guess I just think about the people who are literally serving in harm's way right now, who are just like one, good shot away from never coming home again. It's just deeply insulting. And I'm on the Armed Services Committee and the Homeland Security Committee. So I'm on these national security committees, and we talk about how to make sure we are doing right by our veterans all day long, all the time. But I think the biggest thing we can do to our veterans is make sure they understand that our commitment when they serve is that we are going to take care of them. And that means the injuries they may have below the neck and the injuries that they may have above the neck. That if they have PTSD, if they have depression, if they have suicidal thoughts, that we have a responsibility to support them. The sad truth is we have lost more veterans to suicide, more veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan to suicide than we did in combat. And if you think about that, it's just so devastating. And so our commitment through the Veterans Administration to support our veterans is sacred. And the best thing we can do to our veterans is give them the care that they need when they come home.
I agree. My dad is actually a doctor for the Veterans Affairs. And so he's like in the process of opening a new clinic and, just like getting his thoughts on it also. It's just very disheartening to hear, the person that's supposed to be the commander in chief and supposed to be supporting everybody have those words. But it's more of a case of, being disappointed but not surprised when it comes to Donald Trump. So the next question is, okay, there's a little bit before it, but a few months ago, your state's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, had taken a great deal of heat from some Michigan residents because of her firm COVID-19 response actions that were only intended to help keep everyone in Michigan healthy during this difficult time. In Congress, how will you work alongside Governor Whitmer to help keep your constituents in Michigan's 8th safe and well until the COVID crisis subsides?
Yeah, everyone likes to be a Monday morning quarterback. Everyone likes to say what someone in charge should have done, could have done, but none of them are responsible for people's lives. None of them, besides our governor, will be faced with the history books who will write the story of how each state handled COVID-19. And while there has been a lot of pain, our businesses are terrified. The truth is her mandate and the way that she will be judged is on how she handled the public health side of the outbreak. And I give her a ton of credit, especially when people started really hammering, saying and doing really horrible things to publicly counter what she was doing. But the best thing that all government can do, but certainly myself working with the governor, is we can coordinate. We cannot work against each other, but we can work together. And you'd be surprised how many times there's just no communication on these things. So whether it's the governor, the state legislator, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the mayor of Detroit, whoever it is, whatever you're working on, it has to be a tag team sport. And so just this past year, once I heard, for instance, that the governor was going to set her own PFAS standard, this forever chemical in the water. She wasn't happy with the federal standard. It's way too lax. She said, I'm going to do my own state standard. And I was perfect. We coordinated. I went back to Washington and I wrote a bill that said the U.S. military has to clean up PFAS in a state based on whatever is the strictest standard, federal or state, right? And that's just tag team right there. And so that's how we work together and how we will continue, I hope, to work together.
That's really great to hear. So kind of similarly about, water standards and everything. In Congress, what do you plan to do to address the issue of environmental racism in places like Flint and beyond?
Sorry, you sped up super fast there for a second. Can you just repeat what will I do about what?
Oh, environmental racism in places like Flint and beyond.
Yeah, we were lucky that we just got a big federal settlement for the people of Flint, but it took years and years and years. Listen, we know that the places that have the higher poverty rates, that have larger numbers of people of color, are the ones that are dealing with the worst air quality, the worst water quality, the least amount of green space. All of those compounding environmental issues. And I think it's new, but important that we think about environmental security, environmental issues through a justice lens, and who's receiving the help and who's not. I think is now a question that, frankly, I don't think was asked 15 years ago, that is now regularly part of the conversation. And so I just think it's important when we put new standards in place, when we put new projects in place, that we think about who's benefiting, who's losing, and kind of put all the bills up to a certain environmental justice principle set. And you just got to prove that the bill that you're proposing has thought through the second order effects on justice issues and equity issues. And I think that there's some bills that directly get at this, that have the straight on approach. But I do think, if I'm passing a conservation bill on wildlife, we should have to think about the environmental justice issues associated with even what seems like really simple bills.
Yeah, I really think that, applying a very justice forward response to it will really help us kind of accelerate the process. And like you said, this isn't a conversation that we would have been having a decade ago regarding environmental racism. So our next question is, young people have marched in the streets to protest rampant gun violence in American schools and American neighborhoods. What gun control reform proposals do you support? Did it speed up again?
Sure. So we voted on some of them, but No. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We voted on a number of them. The truth is, we voted on a number of gun safety pieces of legislation in my first term in Congress. They just haven't been taken up by the Senate. So they just sit there with the other 600 bills that we've passed that haven't been taken up by the Senate. The most important one that would just be really important because it's just, I think, largely accepted at this point is universal background checks. Just if you're going to buy a weapon, you're going to go through a background check. It's going to be rigorous. It's going to be well funded, those systems. And we're going to close all the loopholes, right? No like special ways to avoid the background check. Forget about the gun shows, avoiding background checks. Just do a background check. If you do it at Target or you do it at Dunham's, do it for the internet and do it for a gun show. Then, I carried a weapon when I was sent to Iraq. I carried a handgun and then also a semi-automatic. And I just can't support any equipment that turns a gun into a fully automatic weapon, right? Trigger mechanism, is extended magazines. There's a ton of this equipment that really takes any normal weapon and turns it into a real machine of death. Frankly, there's a bunch of other legislation that I think really intersects with the issue of veteran suicide, making sure that if we know someone wants to hurt themselves, they've told people they want to hurt themselves, and they have a weapon in their home, there should be some way that we can help that person, that we can engage and keep them from doing something to harm themselves. So there's a whole suite of legislation. We voted on it. I've supported it. It just hasn't gone anywhere. And that's where I hope the next Congress has a different set of players and possibilities on gun violence.
That's really good to hear. So our next question is, what are your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement and the ongoing fight for racial justice in America?
Yeah. So it was interesting. After the murder of George Floyd, I just immediately started calling all of the African-American leaders across my district who I know, and pastors and nonprofit leaders and professors and, the head of the MLK Commission in Lansing, like just calling everybody. And the overwhelming feeling that I heard from people, especially the older generation, was just sheer exhaustion that their grandchildren were protesting the same things that they protested. And in their exhaustion, I saw young people really rise to the occasion. And, I did a big rally, an NAACP rally in Lansing. And, NAACP is like one of the oldest and most venerated African-American institutions in the country. And so, of course, we walked to the Capitol, and then none of the speakers were any older than 24. I think and it was so important to hear the young voices of the Black Lives Matter movement just coming into their own and taking leadership on things. But we continued those conversations. At first, I would have these giant Zoom calls with all these leaders, and we would talk about police reform and police reform, what kind of police reform. And there wasn't one leader on that Zoom call who didn't support the idea that we needed police and that we needed them to have training and we needed them to have resources in order to treat people the way that they're supposed to be treated. But beyond police reform, this group really pushed me on formulating a comprehensive agenda, an anti-racist agenda to counter systemic racism in housing, in education. And so what I think I learned in the last 3 or 4 months is that I can help be a convener of groups who would otherwise never be in the same room together. We did this just the other day. I got a bunch of African-American business owners together with the Michigan Banking Association to talk about how hard it is to get your first loan when you're an African-American business leader. And those are conversations that I feel like I can facilitate. And I think that in 2020, part of being an elected leader is being able to facilitate those conversations or bring people together for that purpose. And I saw the spirit of those protests all over the district. I'm talking about anti-racism protests in all white small towns that have never had something like that in their lives. Young people leading them in places like Holly and Oxford and Lake Orion and Rochester Hills and Brighton and Howell. And I think that that's right now the greatest force for change is just people understanding that it's not enough to just be not racist. You have to be anti-racist. People have really, I think, started to internalize that. That's a huge, huge step for the protesters who led it.
I think it's a really good message to send that, elected leaders are there to bring people together and have these conversations in large groups and using your platform for good change. So our last question is, what's one defining leadership quality that you possess that your opponent does not?
I guess between my life in national security before this, which is constantly like driven by crisis events, like there's a war breaking out here, there's a coup breaking out here, and being a Democratic representative of a Republican district for 2 years, I have, I think, honed a skill of maintaining calm and focus in the middle of a storm. And I think that is an asset in this environment right now. It is very easy to just get sucked up in the fury of the moment, in the tension of the moment, in the stress of the moment. And I do worry about the next 4 or 5 months. I am quite concerned. But it doesn't help anything to sort of lose focus and lose your mission. And right now I have a mission and I have the focus honed over many years of dealing with crises.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I cannot hear you, Charlie. Maybe
Are we good now?
One.
Yes. Are we good? Okay, great. I said thank you, Harita, for the questions, but then I just wanted, before we close out tonight's program, turn it back to you one last time. If there's anything you'd like to tell the audience, and, we've already sent out the links for what they can do to sign up. Just any closing words.
So obviously we'd love to have as many volunteers as we can. But in addition to your sort of work, the other thing that I just want to put out there is there is no handbook for working on a campaign in the middle of COVID. There's no one to turn to say, how do you do this? How do you engage people without getting in their physical space? How do you engage people all online or people who are not online? And if you come and volunteer with us, one of the things that I hope you bring to the table is what are your ideas? I mean, we're advertising on gas pump video screens because people are still pumping gas. We're experimenting with advertising on the top of pizza boxes because everyone's getting takeout. There's no handbook for that. Those are ideas that volunteers brought to the table. So if you volunteer with us, I hope you not only bring your blood and your sweat and your time, but what do you got? I mean, this is all new. So we're a meritocracy that really believes in promoting people who do really amazing work and have really great ideas. So I hope you bring that. And I'd love to have you guys.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Congresswoman, for giving us some of your time. And you can visit Friends of Intelligence Democracy on social media and also at intellidem.org. Thank you, everyone.